From Idea to Market is produced by Lila Menashe and Joe Schwab. It's an AHF podcast production.
My name is Doug Fairbanks. I'm the president, CEO, and board member at VISIE Inc.
Hi, Doug. Thank you for joining us. Questions about VISIE. So I want you to take us back to the beginning. My understanding, this started with the co-founder, Aaron Bernstein, who is a PhD in optical science and engineering, if I remember correctly. And there was a mission for this sort of technology in neuroscience. Tell me a little bit about that, and tell me about how this work evolved into what VISIE is today.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So when we think about the history of VISIE, it really dates back to when the company was called Advanced Scanners. And as you mentioned, Aaron Bernstein was one of the original founders, a PhD optical physicist, and somebody who was thinking very deeply about how do you use technology to solve the problems of really humanity, right? And he had some experience with epilepsy and brain illnesses, and was saying, hey, I want to take my skill sets and use those to create a solution that can help others. Well, you know, VISIE was not born until after I joined the organization about 3 years ago. But I would finished up at grad school at the University of Texas here in Austin, and I was paying attention to different technologies. And Advanced Scanners came across the desk, and I said, wow, that is something really special. There is a group that's doing something really interesting. I wonder if the world knows how special they are. And so I was currently in a role at Johnson & Johnson, and I was thinking about ways to impact patients and improve the way that we develop care. And I said, you know, this is really interesting. And the truth of the matter is I couldn't get the idea out of my head. Aaron and the group was currently working on, you know, brain shift, the idea that when you open up a cranial procedure, the brain floats and moves, and they were watching the ridges of the brain move. And they were saying, hey, we really want to be able to treat patients better. And I said, that application of that technology as it is today could be really meaningful, not just in neuro, but in spine and in orthopedics. And I was really excited about it off the bat. And so when I happened on these folks, I couldn't really get it out of my mind. As somebody who really believes in technology and was seeing this happen, I said, this is unbelievable. And I set out to say, hey, can I introduce you to folks? And that relationship turned into, Doug, will you be an advisor of the company? And so I basically did some free work advising the company. And before you knew it, I couldn't shake that I had to go be there, right? The ideas were so big. The goals of the company were ambitious. And they really needed somebody who could take the ideas and the skill sets and transform them into something that's a reality. And I think actually that lesson is really important when you think about surgeon innovators out there, because you can have an idea, but you can only take the ball so far, right? And it's really about taking your idea and building a team and taking the idea to the next level through getting people to invest themselves in it and to also believe in you. And it's that process of vetting the idea that kind of starts the very early spark of a company to move from kind of 0 to 1, if that makes sense.
You mentioned your role at Johnson & Johnson, where I believe you were in charge of robotics commercialization for a period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was at the Velys team. You know, I like to think that I was kind of a hired gun, right? I just completed doing a business turnaround of orthopedic medical technology out of Munich, Germany. And that came on the radar, and they were saying, hey, we're going to launch a robot at DePuy Synthes, Johnson & Johnson. Will you come over? And so I came into this role, and before I got there, someone made a commitment. Hey, we're going to go to the market in 2 years, and we're going to have commercialized a robot system. And I jumped in and, you know, we pushed like crazy, and it was really exciting to do. We actually delivered that project on time, under budget. And we did so halfway around the world during a global pandemic in a country that had closed borders, and the details of which are really impressive and kind of interesting to play around with. But the truth of the matter is I was just responsible for executing this vision And there was some really impressive work that happened at the engineering at J&J. Now, look, we look at the spin-off of DePuy Synthes from J&J, but J&J tends to move really slow. It's a large organization. And the R&D groups at DePuy Synthes at the time, led by Addie Harris, who actually came over and became a board member here at VISIE, led this group to deliver on a very, very ambitious product in a time where, not a lot of projects moved at that pace, and it was really impressive. And so it was a time where I realized, hey, look, if you want something done, jump in, apply yourself, set very aggressive goals, and don't worry about the obstacles. And actually that's paid out dividends, not just at my time at J&J and others, but primarily here at VISIE.
Were there other key lessons that you experienced or learned at J&J that you've been able to bring over to the startup space at VISIE?
That's a fantastic question. When you think about lessons in big corporations, there really is an idea that, hey, look, how do you innovate, right? And we experience it sometimes today as we interact with larger organizations who want to look at VISIE's technology, say, hey, look, we're so risk adverse. We have so many people that have to approve things. And when I was in the Velys role and launching robotics at Johnson & Johnson, one of the things I said is, look, how much can I affect myself? And how much can my team affect? And how do we, rather than live into, hey, look, there's not a possibility to change things, to say each day, what can you change? And I was fortunate to have the support and the mandate to deliver on time. But that turned over to startup where you say, hey, look, there's vast amounts of unknown that you jump into. And really, in order to keep yourself sane and to keep the company moving forward, you have to set goals for yourself. Say, hey, look, nobody's out there begging for my product. I have to get them to know what my product is. And in order to do that, I have to do something that's impressive. And so, the lessons that I've learned along my career, and by the way, I spent some time at Zimmer Biomet, Zimmer at the time, and some other companies. But really, the idea that, hey, look, you're going to make the forward motion, and you have to do that. That's delivered the success we've had at VISIE, and it was a lesson that I picked up along the way. But really, what had honed in on as I moved into the chief executive role here.
Speaking of the technology that you're going to have to showcase to people and make them understand, I've heard you talk about continuous anatomic auto tracking, or CAT. And I understand that's a concept that's really fundamental to the product that you offer, but you also feel that it's fundamental in how it redefines what robots can do during surgery. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So when we think about CAT and the development of CAT, continuous anatomic auto tracking, the basis or need for it actually came from the idea that, are you identifying what is really important? And we talk about that. We won an award at Anterior Foundation that was really meaningful for several years ago. And Charlie Cook gave a speech before, and I don't remember the exact quote, but he said it's the entrepreneur's plight to realize or appreciate what everybody ignores, right? It's your goal to say, hey, when there is a problem, that's not a problem, that's an opportunity. And for me, I was very fortunate in my career to have spent a lot of time. During COVID, I talked to 400 orthopedic surgeons in 1 hour calls. It was unfettered access, and has been and was really insightful for me as I talk about robotics and technology. But before that, I did 200 flights a year for close to 10 years, visiting different hospitals and surgeons all through the country. And it was in those observations, right, standing in ORs and interacting with surgeons, that you understand, hey, what is the real problem here? And there are things that differ from one to the next, like philosophy. But then there are things like, hey, look, I don't want to put pins in the patient. If I put pins in the iliac wing to do navigation or robotics, that pin site sometimes is more painful than the hip surgery itself, right? And so when we think about CAT, we said, what is the opportunity? And when we looked at the technology, the IR tracking, stereographic tracking that's used today is now over 40 years old. And it may be the oldest piece of technology in your OR. And the truth is that there's a possibility for something better. Less hold in the patient, less hassle for the surgeon, and less time in surgery. We saw that as a win. And so when I came across advanced scanners, we said, okay, it's taking pictures of the patient. Now, how do we get it to see the patient in real time? And the team got latched onto that and they wouldn't let it go. They just said, we're going to deliver that. We're going to deliver that. And the first time they did it kind of fast was 4 times a second. And by the way, if you see something at 4 times a second, it's unbelievably slow how 4 times a second is. But then they said, well, we can go faster. We can go faster. And before you know it, that the question of speed was no longer a thing. And we can see the patient and we can remove all this hassle to the procedure. And we can really consider what is the impact on the surgeon and what is the impact on the patient and how do you deliver something better. And so we're excited about what CAT has done.
So one of the ways that you've enabled yourself at VISIE, it sounds like, in order to advance these technologies as quickly as possible, is you kind of create everything from the hardware to the software. It's sort of an Apple style philosophy, a built differently mindset, you might say. I know you've been at companies that also source products in order to make their entire product. So why was an all in-house or mostly in-house process the right approach for VISIE?
Yeah, Joe, thank you for the question. The idea is that, look, there's a lot of innovation out there that is kind of a repackaging of other ideas. And we consider ourselves at VISIE a deep tech, meaning that we're attempting to do something that nobody has done before. And by the way, I think we're having some moderate success at it and getting better every day. But that being said, is built differently means that the team here is highly engineering focused, right? I don't know, have a partial engineering degree from an undergrad. Everybody in the building has an engineering degree, and it's part of the culture and the fabric. But the truth of the matter is that to solve the type of problem that we're solving, you actually have to go to a fundamental level on every piece, right? And I once used the example, like, hey, we were getting fast, but the software and the equipment that we had made originally would only let us go so far. And the analogy was like the Apollo 13, like when I don't know if anybody knows Apollo 13, but they're ripping all the seats out of the LEM to make it light enough so it gets back home right. And that's what we do here in the office is you got to go unbolt the chairs to say, can this thing go fast enough? And we have to know every component, because if we're using something off the shelf, we can't get to the support, we can't get the answers, we can't push the edge of what's going on here. And so really it was part of what was going on at Advanced Scanners. And it was a really good pull through for us to say, hey, look, we will examine every part of this problem at its fundamental level to be able to solve it. And the only other piece of that, and I'll tie back to building a good team and building a good organization, is do the people in the building have the passion to do that? Are they rewarded by solving hard problems? And luckily here we have really great people who say, look, I only want to solve it if it's complex. I don't want to, I'm not going to shy away from it. And I'm not going to find a way to say no. I'm going to say, yes, let's do this, because that's how we get stimulated.
One of the ways that VISIE's robot or VISIE's technology has been described is teaching robots to see what the surgeons see. Now, you've described this a little bit in the anatomic auto tracking. In practical terms, in the operating room, what does that mean for the surgeon? And I'll just put in a plug here. I saw the demo at the AAOS, the probably 50-second relatively viral video that went where the robot's tracking literally the knee moving back and forth. And so I can see that from my perspective, what the technology is doing. What's the vision for what that's going to look like and what that's going to mean to surgeons in the OR in 1 year, in 5 years?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that question, right? Is, what does a computer seeing like the surgeon mean, right? So first of all, just as a base level, computers actually don't see things well, right? Like the way that you put data into the computer, there's lots of ways to interface it, but it usually has to be pretty organized. And when you and I look at a table, we know what the things are. We know the cup of coffee is that big and that far away. And all these things are things that our brain does really easily and does it very quickly. We use, a form of stereography. Stereography is two cameras. Our eyes use, a thing called binocular disparity where they compare two images and do it very quickly and do it very well to tell us how far away things and how big they are. Thing is, computers don't. You point a camera at something, they don't know if it's flat or if it's round or how far away it is. And there's a couple different ways that you get to 3D imagery. Now, what we did was we essentially built at the idea that we're going to say we're going to do 3D scanning, but we're going to do it in high accuracy. So, every one of these different modalities has different accuracy. We're going to do it at high accuracy, but then we have to do it very fast, which is challenging, right? So if you're doing something for the FDA, you really got to, say, hey, something's below 2 millimeters. We are looking at things regularly at something like 254 micron level, right? Tiny measurements. A couple of human hairs is 200 microns, right? And so we're looking at things very accurately, but we're producing a ton of data, and then we got to process the data. And the problem in all of that is that you have to process it faster than the person that you're working with can realize it's changing. So I'm going to draw back to computers. Computers have a hard time seeing things. We have this technology that from the ground up is built in the house, the hardware and the software. And it essentially says, I can measure everything in the field. I can tell you how big it is, and I can tell you how far away it is. And that's important because in surgery, I want to tell the surgeon where the anatomy is, because that's the whole question. Now, to draw back to your example of the demo, that's actually really hard for us because seeing things, you and I are seeing things, but is there any indication we're seeing things? No. It's actually it should be a silent problem, right? We saw things, we acknowledged it. So we put the device on the end of the robot because it was a really good demonstration that, hey, it is tracking this femur and it is doing it at a speed that is so fast that you don't realize that it's changing and doing it. So in that demo, the 3D scanner that we built is looking at the anatomy. It's measuring it. It's adding up a bunch of pictures to be very accurate. It's saying where it is in space. It's saying, go to that place while being mounted to something, while also watching something that moves. And the problem is actually really hard. And the analogy I'll use, and people are probably tired of hearing it, but it's like videotaping a race car while driving a race car, hanging out the window with a camera and taking a picture of the other race car. So the demo was really great. I think it got our use case across. But the truth of the matter is that when VISIE goes to market, you should actually never even think about us. We should just give sight to your system. It's to say, that's bone, that's ligament, that's fat, that's tendon, that's the patella tendon, that's the greater trochanter. We know all these things. We see them, and we got a database of understanding of anatomy that can tell us these are important structures for you, surgeon, so that when you operate, it's seamless.
Was that demo the hardest technical challenge that VISIE has faced so far? And if not, what has been?
I have 3 young kids, and I watch my partner give birth to 3 kids, and that's a terribly hard thing to do. And then after apparently the brain releases chemicals and you forget how hard it is. So a lot of the really hard challenges, the analogy is that a lot of the really hard challenges of fear at VISIE are like giving birth. It was so hard. There was no light in the tunnel, and then it was over, and then we celebrated, right? So the demo actually was a celebration for the organization because it was a really cool way to do it. And by the way, in startup, it's really tough because we don't get a regular customer interaction. Like, we're not making revenue. We're not somehow bolstered by what the market is doing. We have these handful of inflection points when they come up for air, and we hope that the world can see and appreciate what we do. So it was particularly a great moment when we got a response at OrthoView, at OrthoPitch, to say, hey, look, we like what you're doing. We like what is going on here. We think this is an exciting technology. Now, when we pedal back is the really hard part to the company, one of the hardest achievements that I believe we made, and we're working on a couple things that are really interesting right now, very challenging. But to go from essentially 4 to over 25 hertz was a huge leap, from the technology standpoint. 4, like we said, is slow. You watch something do something 4 times a second, you're surprised how slow that does. Human perception, typical humans are seeing between 20 and 24 hertz, so 20 or 24 times a second, and your brain kind of smooth things out. Professional video gamers can see it like 30 because they're used to tracking things very fast. But to go from 4 to 24, that was a huge milestone. And by the way, it wasn't just, oh, we got a little bit better, we turned a little screws and it happened. It required that we rethink from the ground up how we do this. And fortunate for us, we had done all the things from the ground up. So going back to it wasn't super challenging. So that was a milestone and an achievement. I think was really a great accomplishment. The demo, I think, was rewarding for us to see. So great question.
Moments like that demo, whether they're a reward for the team or not, they certainly catch the industry's attention. What does a moment like that teach you about how people, how surgeons, how industry perceive what VISIE's doing?
So much of what we do here is an effort to help the market understand what our value proposition is. Because, in a deep tech, you're working on a hard problem for a very long time. And by the way, working on anything costs money. And so you got to say, hey, did we do something tangible? And by the way, could you get to the end of doing all this work and the thing you create, even though you're excited about it, may not mean much to other folks. And so how do you essentially call out this is so for us, it became important for us to have a regular check-in with the market to be able to drive some understanding of the technology. We said we think that solving pins and arrays and registration is an important solution, but we're not surgeons. So we need to go out and talk to folks that are. Luckily, when we talk to surgeons, they're like, please, please, please solve this problem. And actually, one of the first great validations we had was this Shark Tank at Anterior Hip Foundation, where even the judges are like, okay, this is cool. Like, this is not one other thing this is not one other thing that we solved 4 other times, and there's 6 out there. They said, this is cool. So doing these pitch competitions actually were a form of validation, and Anterior Hip Foundation being so surgeon focused was really nice for us. That being said, we have to come up for error once in a while and say, did we do something that was right? And does that achievement mean something to folks? Because, the end of the road is, hey, if we don't want it, we're not going to buy it. Now, the other huge lift in all this, and it is important to think about this as you do any startup, is to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? Now, is what you do, is all the work you put into this going to produce some outcome that will benefit the investors, importantly, as a startup, but will benefit healthcare, is really critical as a mandate that all healthcare companies should have. And I think that is where we land as we think about validation of anything, is to say, did we achieve what we wanted as we thought about the end user?
How do you ensure, you touched on this a little bit, but how do you ensure VISIE, which is a tech company, essentially stays surgeon-centric in what it offers rather than tech for tech's sake?
Great question. How do you ensure that technology serves its end goal, especially in healthcare? By the way, that pulls back to a core principle of ours, right? Which is, we believe in surgeons, right? There's a lot of talk about automation these days, and automation can come in different levels, and you can have tasks taken over by others. That's fine. But really, for us, the critical element in all of this is that a surgeon has bought in on an idea, or bought in on the solution helps them do their job better, right? Surgery is done by surgeons, and for us, we're not a company that moves away from that. So when I think about the audience and the group at Anterior Foundation, you say, look, I'm in a unique position because the things that I experience in my OR are actually things that others may experience as well. And it is again the entrepreneur's plight to say, I can identify a problem as an opportunity. Now, the next big piece in all of that, as you go to form a company or to create a startup or to create a solution, is to say, okay, do I believe so strongly in that solution that I'm willing to go out and do it? And by the way, doing is a big deal, and that I'm willing to put my name on the line and to go hire people and to get behind this in a way that adds the thrust. There are lots of ideas. I would argue that execution is way underrated as a critical element for anything, right? We, like I talked about earlier in the speech, setting a milestone, setting a goal, and going after it, and putting your resources and putting your time into it is important. An idea alone will not make a success.
So let's talk about your next milestone, because even without a product on the market yet, VISIE obviously is going to be looking towards putting a product on the market. And from your perspective, from the business side of things, what does building for scale look like in a company like yours?
Yeah. VISIE is not waiting to go to market. VISIE is going to market, and as fast as I can, right? It is a core mandate for us. It's a critical path element to say, how do we get to market? Now, luckily, the ecosystem is set up in a way that kind of supports this, right? So, if you can get to a good idea and to get to a fundamentally strong, competent build in the technology, you can actually engage in contract manufacturers who will build a thing as you describe it, and actually will do some refinement along the way. So VISIE is actively engaged with contract manufacturers. We are not going to build scanners here in this building, in the hundreds that are kind of sitting on the verge of moving into our production and into the world. We can handle the volume. And by the way, it's just a bunch of engineers anyways, right? So we look at there is resource and there is an environment that once you have landed on something that you think does what you want it to do and accomplishes the goal and meets its kind of verification of its design requirements, those things can then be handed off to contract manufacturers. So I think it's good for education of surgeons to say, look, you're not going to have to set up a whole factory if you make something. If you get to a place, there are good resources that can turn your product into something and make it a sellable product, right? So that is the good point. Now I'll leave you also with the idea that as you run a business or take a product, you have to have good practice in acquiring things, right? You got to interview lots of parties that do this, because in doing so you learn more and you're able to execute, right? So you say, hey, look, I learned this from the other interview, and I should go back to my vendor and ask them about this, and I've hired somebody who knows something about this. Looking at one person is rarely ever the good idea for getting a good competitive good result.
Because your technology, VISIE's technology, is designed to integrate with an existing robot rather than necessarily to replace a robot, I'm assuming once it's integrated into another manufacturer, another vendor's product, another company's product, that it will have to go through FDA clearance. And so can you talk a little bit about how different or more complex or less complex is that process for a company like VISIE compared to trying to clear a standalone device?
Yeah, regulatory is a super complicated thing, because it needs to be. It needs to be that companies are producing safe products to be used on patients now. If you think about it right now, something like 80% of robotic and navigation companies use a single vendor for their stereography cameras. And that vendor provides something like 48,000 cameras to the market. The footprint is pretty dramatic. And if you walk around one of these trade zones, you can see a lot of these cameras are the same cameras. So our regulatory guidelines have us pursuing a subcomponent classification, which means that we have to design to certain engineering standards. ISO 13485. There's electrical safety 60601. There's software 62304. There's a bunch of these essentially standards that we built to. But but our regulatory subcomponent classification says we design to these engineering standards, we manufacture those engineering standards, we turn over our device, and our device gets then embedded in a device that goes through 510K or through regulatory clearance itself. So this is a well-worn path. The camera company that's doing it now for most systems on the market has been making these cameras for about 40 years and has a ton deployed to the field. And it's kind of a known way of pursuing things, and we intend fully to comply to those standards.
How do you approach your conversation with potential partners? And have you received any pushback or feedback or anything surprising regarding a partnership model with VISIE's technology?
Yeah, this model for going to market as a subcomponent is different than most, and probably only fits a handful of styles of products. Ours was luckily fits in there. It has its benefits and its drawbacks, but as you think about this approach for the strategics, the challenge in everything is something new gonna play out. And so the two conversations that we have is, hey, does it work? Will it be real? Which is essentially challenging the premise of what we do, which you should do when you look at a partnership. Is typically the first question. The second question is usually, can we get it exclusively? Right. So they're kind of at odds with each other, which is I don't know that I believe that this is real, but if it was real, I want to be the only one who owns it. Right. So we are at various stages of having those discussions with a lot of folks, really drawing the vision. We won Ortho Pitch at AAOS, and then we went to AUKUS and we showed something that kind of the execution of the device as a follow-up. And we were surprised that we still had some of these oh wow moments. In fact, the team writes down their notes after, and a handful of people said audible wow at the end of presentation, like great, it feels good for us. And so that's nice.
A little bit on intellectual property. You guys have been very busy in the intellectual property space, obtaining 16 or so patents in the last 8 months, which is super impressive. Can you tell me a little bit about protecting your innovation, protecting your intellectual property, and how does that shape your confidence as you move towards commercialization?
On the subject of IP, this is critically important, and even more so as you work into long development pathway products, which are anything in healthcare. Lucky for us, we started with kind of an IP approach that was, throw everything against the wall, what sticks, what sticks. But, a couple of years back, we went and hired a chief IP officer who previously was at Nuvasive, and he had the mandate to professionalize their portfolio. And it's a gentleman named Jonathan Spangler. He's a fantastic contributor to the organization. But our challenge is that on a lot of things, we're out front. Like, we are inventing how to do this the first time. And so we can't then go tell the world about it without saying, oh, wait, we need to own this and we need to own our space. So a lot of things we're out front. And creates this very delicate dance of what are you going to tell today? And has that been cleared? And by the way, there's some really cool stuff on the other side of this wall that I love to tell the world about, but I can't make a public disclosure on something that's really awesome just yet. We continue to file. We are very active on filing. And my advice is to surgeon entrepreneurs and to those in healthcare is that you carefully vet your IP person. And by the way, you can get somebody. By the way, you can get anybody who will go file for you, and somebody will go file a ton. In fact, we may or may not run into that pitfall, which is everything you bring to me, I'm happy to put on file. Those are billable hours. The lawyers are happy to create billable hours. But the answer is that, hey, look, are we going to commercially sell this thing? Is it realistic? Are you doing this test of, hey, can we sell this to somebody for money, and will it be a real product? And you really need to start by asking those questions and not let them, give you you can't just give away the car keys and let someone say, run, follow everything you want. You got to be thinking about commercial. And a good IP partner will say, hey, are we actually going to sell this, or do we just like this idea? And by the way, I'll tell you that with engineers, there's a point of pride of filing IP, and you got to walk delicate on the idea that, hey, look, while I love your idea, why I think it's a novel invention, that may not be something that is really useful for us to put forth a bunch of cash on. And we need to maybe hold it off for now or till later and to think about that. So there is some steps to doing this right. We are filing, but I think we're filing in a sweet spot of things that have not been done yet and are exciting for the future.
Just a few more questions. Looking ahead, where do you see VISIE's technology going, both within orthopedics and given that you started outside of orthopedics, I'm assuming the goal is to move beyond it at some point as well.
Yeah, Joe, the goal is ortho is really exciting to us. You can affect the lives of a lot of people. I started in pancreatic cancer drug development. That was hard as a young guy. I was in my 20s and everybody I was meeting was ending up, passing away. And it's really hard work. And I went to orthopedics as a way of saying, hey, look, in ortho, you fix people and they're better. And there is a real need to advance orthopedics. And there is an appetite in orthopedics for technology. So we're not looking outside of orthopedics for anything to run to. We are excited about things that are happening. Neuro is exciting for us because the problem gets a little bit easier and neuro treatments are advancing and we have some passion in the organization working with the brain. So there are spaces that we continue to push on. We really like knees. We really are eager to spend more time in hips. We think that there's some value. You think about the challenges in hips. In orthopedics, the hips tend to do really well. Hitting the limbic safe zone is really challenging for surgeons. And how do you advance and improve that? And then if you think about it, leg length discrepancy is among or the most litigious aspect of doing any orthopedic procedure, whether it's trauma, hip, knee, shoulder, whatever. And getting leg lengths right, just right. We do fantastic on the femur side to be able to see the femur anatomy and to be able to give you some insights about it. That's really a strong suit for VISIE, and we're excited about taking the technology and kind of proliferating it there, because putting arrays and rotating the leg out to do all that rigmarole is a huge challenge for surgeon. And I think there's an opportunity to provide some really good insights there. So while we say, hey, look, neuro is cool, spine is interesting to us, ortho has the ability to have an outside impact on healthcare and on people, humanity, and we're really excited to continue to push that. We see hip and shoulder as being really exciting areas for growth after we clear this kind of this knee area.
For surgeons or engineers who are listening, who have an idea, but don't know where to start, if you could give them your single best piece of advice from that perspective, what would you say?
For surgeons and engineers who have an idea that are looking to say the next step, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to really humble yourself and say, okay, yeah, I have this idea. I think it's great, but do people think it's great? And most importantly, are the people who use it gonna think it's great, right? And so, I always say that finding the problem is really if you get latched on the problem, we're latched on the problem here, but when you get latched on the problem, that really solves a lot of the other things. If other people can see your problem. And so what I would recommend in anybody is to say, hey, are you capable of taking your ideas and telling people you trust and like and having them and being confident that they may give you feedback that you might not like, right? And say, can I honestly receive that? And if you can't honestly receive that, then somebody take the idea and give it to somebody else and then get the feedback and then give it to you, right? Is there something? So always vetting your idea, spending your time. And I attribute my success on finding, hey, look, pins are a pain in the neck. That was the result of me talking to hundreds and hundreds of surgeons all over the world. And for that insight just bubble up to the top and create a thing. So really vetting your idea is the critical first step, because we can see technologies. And by the way, it's really easy to get fascinated by technology. And you're like, oh, that's really cool. But what does it solve? And does it do something that's, how do you walk this fine line between gimmicky and real use cases that are going to mean something to somebody? And that's where we zero in. So if I give advice to new engineers and surgeons, is go out and talk to your friends and say it's somebody else's idea. Say, I heard this idea. What do you think about it? So that they feel comfortable giving you the honest feedback. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Move on. You go, oh, that hurts my feelings, but at least I'm not 7 years in and $20 million in this. And then someone tells me it's terrible, right? That's better to know early.
So our series is titled From Idea to Market. And you've been kind enough to share your thoughts with us here today. If you were to take that phrase from idea to market and apply it to the stage you're at in VISIE's journey, what, if anything, does that mean to you personally, or what would you think about that?
Yeah, the term idea to market, I think is one that resonates well with me, right? Because in this interview, I talked about, the various achievements of the company and meeting milestones and accomplishing things. And by the way, if you say that from idea to market is a journey, it actually is important to treat it as such. Is that when you win Anterior Hip Foundation, when you win Ortho Pitch, when you're a finalist at South by Southwest Health, and when you have these accomplishments along the way, it's important to say, "Oh, I feel good about that. I've done something. I've advanced. I've moved forward, and I've somewhat validated the ideas and things that I'm pursuing," which are good because you'll need fuel on a journey to keep going. Now, it also ties back to the other concept, which is, hey, there's not a whole lot to celebrate in the grand scheme of things here, because market is the end goal. VISIE still in the other room, we have a board that says number of patients treated, 0. We haven't accomplished our goal. We haven't set out. We said we will get to market. We will treat patients. We will advance healthcare. And you got to stay locked on. While it feels good to have these steps along the way, there still is the goal. You got to get to the finish line. The finish line is get it to market and treat patients and do the good that you promised, because you can get caught up. There's lots of people who get caught up in startup and just spend a lot of time going to networking events and happy hours and doing the contest. But the contest is not the answer. You got to be mindful about goals. And so there's two pieces to this. One is when you need to enjoy the journey, celebrate the wins because they can sustain you. The second is the job is not done till the job is done. And it's our goal to deliver for patients. And that's what we intend to do.
Thank you so much. And thank you for talking with me today. If there's anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to with the questions, you've been more than generous with your time.
I really appreciate the time, Joe. And thank you for taking the time to think about innovation. We talk about casting a vision into the world, and it takes folks on the other side to hear and be interested in a better way for us to survive, right? We have to say it to somebody, and it's nice when we see surgeons and organizations like Anterior Hip Foundation saying, we're going to dedicate time to innovation and to embracing and learning about what's new, because it may help us do this thing better. And I'm excited about that. We really do appreciate Anterior Foundation and you taking the time to chat with us.